Our next talk is our Day 2 Strand 3 session by David Spencer. Dave is a practicing secondary school teacher based in Spain and author of the popular Macmillan series Gateway, the latest edition of which is Gateway to the World. Dave has given talks in many different countries and is active on social media at facebook.com/teachwithdave. During Dave's session, we recommend watching in speaker view. And if you have any questions, please type them in the Q&A box. Over to you. Please share your screen, Dave.
Hello, everybody. Can you all see my screen at the moment? You can, yeah. Great. By the way, well, hello, everybody. Already some nice comments there. By the way, if you want to put anything in the chat box, I will be reading the chat box at the same time. And for the last 5 minutes, I hope to be able to answer any questions that you may have. Thank you very much to IATEFL YLT SIG for inviting me today. And I was asked to talk about global skills, and I think maybe one of the most global skills of all is what I want to talk about today, which is tenacity and grit. And I feel quite passionate about this subject. So we're going to be together for this 25-minute talk. The title is When the Going Gets Tough. And of course, when the going gets tough, the tough get going. So let's begin, okay? Let's begin with a little bit of sort of bad news, I suppose. The bad news is that I suppose that life, if you can remember, I'm quite old now, so it's difficult to remember being a teenager. But I think that life as a teenager is never particularly easy. It's a difficult part of life when you're growing up. You're not really a child, but you're not really an adult either. And so it's always typically difficult. Obviously, the word adolescence sort of gives that idea of things being difficult. But as you know from the introduction, apart from writing books, I am still in the classroom every day working with teenagers. And I've been working now for 35 years in the classroom. And personally, I do believe that today things seem to be even more difficult than ever, unfortunately, for our teenage students. Here are just some of the reasons why I think that today life as a teenager is quite tricky. As I say, it's always been tricky, but I think it's also tricky because there are some new problems that our teenage students have. I'm not going to read out the whole list, but if you look at that, obviously at the moment with the pandemic, with the recent problems we've had in the last couple of years, things have been difficult. Then we have also modern problems such as unhappiness and dissatisfaction caused by social media, which is often in the news at the moment. Yeah, Danielle is saying that, yeah, from experience as a parent, right, that things are tricky. There's lots of problems. There's always been problems of bullying. When I was a boy, there were problems of bullying. Now, of course, we also have cyberbullying. We've always had problems of stress caused by competition from school, from exams. But I would say that it's maybe a little bit more difficult today. Uncertain future. And you'll notice that the last word or expression I have in my list, I've put it in red because I've added it in just very recently because it was in the newspaper, in The Guardian, with a statistic about how many teenagers are worrying about the environment. So eco-anxiety is yet another problem that our teenagers have and are suffering more than ever. Now, a really stupid question for you, and you can answer in the chat box if you like, but it's a bit of a silly question. My question is, can we make these problems, can teachers make these problems disappear for our teenage students? Yes or no? Can we take these problems away? Can we make them disappear? What do you reckon? Naomi thinks yes. Daniela thinks no. To a certain extent, yes. Okay, I'm going to take that. I'm going to take that. That's a lovely answer. To a certain extent, yes. I would say that we can't make the problems disappear. What we can do is give our students the tools to be able to deal with these problems with more strength, with more courage, with more determination. And the tools that we're going to use are these words here. All of these words are words that I love in English. I don't know how you say them in your language, but I just love them in English. Tenacity. Tenacity gives that idea of holding on. Resilient gives that idea of having problems but bouncing back. So something pushes you out of position and you bounce back. And the final word in that list, these are not all totally synonymous, of course. There are slight differences between them. But grit, okay, grit, what a great word. And yes, as our spokesperson in the box is saying, how do you say that in your language? How do you say grit? Now, grit is a word which is particularly, I would say it's like become a little bit trendy talking about grit. And it's maybe thanks particularly to an educational specialist called Angela Duckworth. Okay, and if you go to her website, there is a question and answer page. And obviously, one of the first questions that she has to answer is, what is grit? Now, I have highlighted in red the words that I think are really important. Grit is passion and perseverance for long-term goals. Okay. One way to think about grit is to consider what grit isn't, okay? So grit isn't talent. Grit isn't luck. And grit isn't how intensively, for the moment, you want something. In other words, our students can be naturally great at, for example, English. But in a way, when you're naturally great at something, you don't always have to suffer much to do it well. I would say that not many people are naturally maybe great. They don't necessarily pick up English immediately without problems. So in other words, grit is when things are not easy. That's like an important concept. It's when things are not so easy, but we still carry on. As it says here, grit is not something which is short term. Grit is not something that, like in a 10-minute activity, you show. It's continuing to work when things get tricky. So as Angela Duckworth continues with her definition, it's about having a goal that you care about so much that it organizes and gives meaning to almost everything you do. And the last part, which I think is great, grit is holding steadfast to that goal, even when you fall down, even when progress to that goal is halting or slow. Now, actually, I'm gonna show you something here, okay? This wasn't planned, but I thought about it today, okay? This is a cup. This is not my cup. This is a cup that my son won when he was about 10 years old. And it's a judo cup, but it's not judo because he was good at judo. It was for, in Spanish, tesón, which is tenacity, okay? So he got this cup and I was very pleased and very proud, not because I care about judo, but because he carried on when even he didn't particularly care about judo and wasn't maybe the best in the class, but he kept on trying his best. And I think that that characteristic of doing your best when things are not easy is all about what we want to achieve with our students in the classroom. I don't care if my students are great at English or not. What I care about is that they carry on when things don't go so well and when things are not easy. What I'm going to do is give you my 8 top tips for developing tenacity in our teenage ELT students, okay? Before I do that, I'm going to self-destruct my talk by saying that grit is a great thing and tenacity is a great thing, but just for a second, I want us to remember that of course there are many other things that also can stop somebody from showing tenacity and grit. If you think about Maslow's pyramid for a second, you'll remember that we all have certain needs, whether they're simple needs of food, water, security and safety. So let's admit that grit isn't the solution to everything. If we have students who are suffering because at home they have many, many great problems, grit is not going to be a miracle solution. However, I would say that tenacity and grit are always going to make the situation better than it could be. So remembering again that things can be tricky, let's do our best to persevere and to be determined learners of English. So here are my top tips, okay? The first one, and I think this is really important, success and failure are interrelated. So I think that we always need to encourage with our students a positive attitude towards mistakes, towards correction, and towards criticism. Nobody likes criticism, but we have to sort of encourage our students to realize that criticism and correction are only there to make us better, okay? So it really is encouraging that positive attitude. I'm sure you've seen this. This is a bit of a cliche. You might have seen this on internet, but I think, you know, the spirit of this is absolutely right. Fail, first attempt in learning. We all fail at some moment when we're learning something new. Failure is a part of the route to success. So this idea, this concept, and this is not a bad thing to put on your classroom wall, first attempt in learning, fail. There's a lovely thing to search on the internet. I encourage you to search for it after this conference. The Museum of Failure. Isn't that a great thing to have a museum which looks at the whole question of failure? The Apple Newton, I don't know if any of you, probably you're too young to remember the Apple Newton. It was a little bit disastrous. It was like a tablet, and it was meant to recognize your handwriting on the screen, and it didn't really work very well. So after a while, they made the Apple Newton disappear. But as the Museum of Failure suggests, without the Apple Newton, we would never have got the iPad. So investigate with your students, the Museum of Failure, so many things that have gone wrong, but as the people who created this museum say, learning is the only way to turn failure into success. So let's try and sort of like learn from the things that we do wrong. Here's another beautiful thing that I found very recently. I had never heard of this until about a month ago. Kintsugi. I don't know if any of you know this, but this is a beautiful concept. When you break, for example, a cup, then you don't just throw it away, you repair it, okay? So Kintsugi apparently means golden joinery, more or less like golden repair. So the idea is you break this cup and you put it together again, but you put it together again with a golden paste. And in other words, you're showing that something that is not perfect is still a great thing. And in fact, this broken cup, which has been repaired, shows a certain type of strength and beauty. So let's think about the English classroom. We're not going to repair our students with golden paste, but for example, at the beginning of the year, I always get my students to create a section in their book, which is 3 columns: mistake, correction, explanation. And I make it very clear from the beginning of the year, mistakes are not a problem. Mistakes are not something to be ashamed of. Mistakes are something to learn from. So we're going to write down our mistakes, we're going to write down the correction, and we write down the explanation if there is one. And what we're going to do is, by making mistakes, we're going to learn more English. And so it's really just making this very clear that mistakes are a part of learning, let's look at them in a very, very positive way. And obviously, as teachers, we also have to be positive then about correction. So that's my first tip, taking a positive attitude towards mistakes. My second tip, and this I think is important, when you're young, you look at successful people and just naturally assume that it was easy for them to become successful. But usually, I would say probably, I don't know, in 99% of all circumstances, successful people have not had it easy. And I often show my students these quotations, again, lovely quotations to have on a classroom wall. They're all things that I think are really inspirational. People from all walks of life. Michael Jordan, I failed over and over again in my life, and that is why I succeed. I'm not going to read all of those quotations. The last one I think is very, very relevant in the classroom. I'm a great believer in luck, and I find the harder I work, the more I have of it. And you know, that's the key, isn't it? So usually people are not lucky, I think, in exams. Usually you make your own luck. And so these are things that are worth reminding our students. Thomas Edison, probably the most successful inventor of all time. Genius is 1% inspiration, 99% perspiration. So it's about having great ideas, but it's also about working hard. Again, if you want to investigate online, and if you search for Karen Dark, an amazing story of somebody, a very successful business person who was very active, very adventurous. She had a terrible accident rock climbing, and she continues to be very inspirational to all of us by showing how that if you carry on looking for the positive, then you can succeed. And she's done many amazing things. I think she won a silver medal in the Paralympics. And you can see a quotation at the top on the right there. Whenever I have a hard time now, I remind myself to watch the storm and know that it will pass. That whole concept of sticking at it, of facing adversity, let's make then a direct connection with education. So let's make it explicit to our students. What do we mean when we talk about determination and resilience in the classroom? What does it mean in terms of your studies? What does it mean in terms of your exam results and how you get on at school? So let's take role models who have not had it easy, but who have been successful, and let's get students to think about those. Another top tip, we've got to, particularly with learning a language, we've got to encourage students to keep their sights on realistic short-term and long-term goals. Now, I'm sure you've all seen this stuff when you're learning English, okay? This is in Spanish, but you're going to get the message, okay? You often see these things advertised, either books or courses. English in 100 days, okay? That's just 3 months. I don't think so. I don't think you're going to learn all of English in 3 months. But we've even got English in 21 days. Isn't that amazing? That's a miracle. And my favorite, it's a book that I saw in my local post office, and I wish that I had bought the book, Learn English in 7 days. And, you know, many adults stop learning English because they get frustrated, because they want to learn in 3 months, 3 weeks, or 1 week, and it's not going to happen. So let's remind our students to have short-term goals. Let's look at this month, or let's look at this unit in the book, or let's look at this week. Here's a quotation. The bad news is you can't learn English in a week. The good news is every week you can learn some English. And that quotation comes from me. Okay, I invented that quotation, but I'm quite proud of that quotation, because our students need to realize that you're not going to learn English in a week or in 3 months, but you can learn English every day. Every day you can learn some vocabulary. Every day you can get better at some grammar. Every day you can practice your reading and your listening. And by doing that, there's a great Chinese proverb from the Tao, a journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. That for me that's exactly how I write my books. Each day is one page. If I thought about the whole book, I would never get anywhere. And our students are the same. We just need to break down things, give them realistic, short-term, long-term goals. Now, another top tip number 4, we need to encourage students to realize that why are we doing what we're doing? Why are we doing this? Sometimes we're doing a game and we need to remind students we're doing this not because it's a game, but because it's going to help you to practice some grammar, help you to practice some vocabulary, help you to practice speaking. Some activities that we do in the classroom are not fun, and we have to help our students to be tenacious when things are not incredibly fun. Not everything, when we learn a new skill, not everything is fun. My photograph there is showing that I would love to play guitar like Jimi Hendrix, but before you can do that, you have to do a lot of maybe pretty boring mechanical practice. But that boring mechanical practice serves a really important goal. And in other words, again, it's a little bit like my short-term and long-term goals. The long-term goal is to be able to play the guitar like Jimi Hendrix. The short-term goal might be to learn one chord, one note that you have to play again and again and again. So let's explain that to our students. Learning English is not all about fun. It's not all about, I don't know, more dynamic activities. Sometimes we do grammar, gap fills, choose the correct alternative, because it's going to help them in the long term. So let's explain the goals. Obviously, many students give up learning English, or they want to give up learning English because they worry, they see a text, they can't understand it, and they give up because there are too many things they don't understand. They're listening to a song or a podcast, they give up because they find it difficult. Let's remind our students that you do not have to understand everything. You get the gist, you get some messages in the listening, and that is going to be enough. Answering the questions, but not understanding everything. So again, just reminding our students, these things are all obvious to us as teachers because we went through these stages maybe, but our students don't know this. So we need to remind them, don't panic when you don't understand everything in a text. Now, these pieces of advice are useful for all of us, I think, in our daily lives, but particularly for our students when they get stuck. So what do you do when you get stuck on an exercise? Well, here are some tips. Remember, you're going to see these slides. I think you're going to get these slides or to be able to see these sessions again. Some very simple tips. When you get stuck, talk it over with somebody. Talk about it to a teacher, a parent, classmate, or a friend. Draw on your previous experiences and knowledge. So when you get stuck, have you ever been stuck in this position before? What did you do? How did you get around the problem? Where did you find a solution? Have a rest. Again, sometimes students, when they're doing some difficult piece of work, maybe even a composition, they get stuck and they give up. It's much better to have a rest, do something physical, and then come back again later. A very useful technique, which I mentioned with my quotation about the long journey, break any task into smaller and easier steps or chunks. And sometimes when you're stuck on a problem, try something completely out of the box. Try something that you maybe didn't expect to work, and you might be surprised. My 7th tip of my 8 tips, 7th tip, encourage students to have a positive growth mindset and to be optimistic. We've said that getting things wrong is not a problem. When you do a bad exam, this advice I think is really important for those students who get demotivated after a bad exam. Remember, a poor result is temporary, not permanent. A poor result might depend on external factors. Maybe the exam was more difficult for everybody, not just for you. And maybe it's important to remember a poor result is specific or general. So we're talking about this exam, this question, not, it doesn't mean that all questions are impossible or difficult. And the last one there, I think this is really important. In terms of giving up, some students compare themselves with the best student in the class or with the average student in the class, and maybe they aren't that good, but they shouldn't compare themselves with that student. They should compare themselves with themselves. Are you doing it better than last year? Are you doing it better than last month or last week? If you are, everything is good because you're going in the right direction. And my final tip, okay, top tip number 8 is remember that we as teachers are also great models of tenacity and grit for our students. And these questions, they're from a book that I can definitely recommend if you want to know more about tenacity. This book is not about English language teaching. It's about education in general. It's called Developing Tenacity by Bill Lucas and Ellen Spencer. Ellen Spencer is no relation to me, okay? It's not my sister or anything. And we've got some great questions here. Do you control yourself in moments of stress in the classroom? If you do, you're a good role model of tenacity. Do you admit that you don't know all the answers, but then go off to find them? Well, that's the same. You're showing tenacity. So all of those things, I'm not going to read them all for you. You can read them yourselves. But all of these things, do you get excited when you make a breakthrough, however big or small in class? If you do, again, you are being a great role model. Well, that's good. Somebody said, Galia, that is brilliant. I'm very proud of you. 6 yeses. And that's the way that it should be. If we want our students to be tenacious and gritty, then we need to be tenacious and gritty too, which I'm sure we all are. And we also have to have that optimism that I talked about with our students. Finally, my last quotation. You can see that I love quotations in my talks, okay? But I love this quotation: hard work beats talent when talent doesn't work hard. In other words, some students, some of us in life, we might be naturally good at something. And I know lots of students who are very good at English, but they don't work very hard. And in the end, the students, I believe, who do the best have that great combination of talent, but above all, not just talent, also hard work and tenacity. I think I've finished almost just about exactly on time, which is a miracle for me, especially in 25 minutes. If you would like to get in touch with me, then please do. I always reply directly to any comments. That's at facebook.com/teachwithdave. And I'm not sure, Elizabeth, if there may be any questions in the last couple of minutes.
Yes, Dave, I'll just read one for you. Hi,
yes.
How could we specifically incorporate grit in ELT research? And that's from an anonymous spectator.
Yeah, I wonder if that question came early on in the talk, because I hope that in the tips that I've given, they're all sort of things that we can do directly in the classroom. You know, so the whole idea of encouraging students not to give up with a difficult listening or with a difficult text. So I would say there are lots of, going from our general approach of being positive, having a positive approach towards mistakes and correction, then through to, you know, specific things like encouraging our students with difficult texts, difficult exams, as I've mentioned, and also, you know, this whole idea of learning, for example, vocabulary, for example, little by little, rather than, you know, if we worry about learning English in 3 months or a year, we're going to panic. But if we learn on a day-by-day basis, then I think we can, you know, encourage our students to be more positive.
Thank you very much, Dave, for your 8 wonderful, very useful tips. Excellent. And
thank you.
I liked your ideas of giving the students short-term realistic goals that they can aim for. It encourages them to go on and be more resilient. Okay, thank you very much.
Great. Thanks a lot. Thanks for everybody for turning up, and enjoy the rest of the conference.
Okay, so thank you, Dave. Now we have a 5-minute break.